Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. All right. Welcome to the Into podcast. Appreciate everybody joining us. Today, joined with Rodney Phelps in Western Illinois and Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Morning, Nick.
Guys, I thought, again, just like to start with kind of a quick update where we're at, because I know we're all over the board as far as planting progress, crop progress. So I don't know, Rodney, if you want to start kind of where you guys are at.
Yeah, so finally we've got some warm weather, what I'd call more seasonal weather. Did have a little rain last week, but a lot of the earlier planted stuff's out of the ground now, corn and beans. So now you can drive by and row it, which is a fun time of the year to see things coming out. We're planting wise, we're starting to wrap her up. There's always that field here or there, but for the most part, we're plantings in the books, and so now we're watching for. I don't know that we'll have a lot of replant, but now we're just watching for our next round of chemistry.
Appreciate it, Rodney. Derek?
Yeah, similar to Rodney. Things were moving quickly here over the last couple weeks. Most of my locations would probably put corn planting in that 85-90% done. I got corn in my area anywhere from spike to V4 would probably be the furthest along across Northwest Missouri. But then on the soybean side of things, got beans that are cracking to maybe V1. Not a whole lot past that, but like Rodney said, we're entering those post stages, whether that be post applications of herbicides or fertility, nutritional type things. Those are starting to become top of mind right now. I'd say still the number one thing in my territory right now is guys getting fields cleaned up, the winter annuals and things like that, as we got crops coming up here.
Appreciate that, guys. For us down here, we're all over the board. It's kind of been a difficult spring as far as getting things done. We had some stuff planted there in late March that looks great now. That corn, some of that corn is furthest to the south. It's probably approaching V5, getting closer to V6. The earliest, the long stuff, and some soybeans I saw late last week that were V2 planted the end of March. So those crops are cranking. Problem is we didn't have very much of those. And then, yeah, we've got some corn kind of in that mid-April range. That's probably V2. We have some of that late April corn that's really, really struggling ahead of a pound in rain to come through. And we're going to have some replant from that. But yeah, for me, I'll just say bottom line is this is probably the biggest planting week we've had all season. And yeah, probably just some guys to the east that may get started today or maybe tomorrow, but guys towards West Central Missouri that have been running hard all week. So, yeah, this will be the biggest push we've had on planting all season. With that said, guys, I mean, I guess some topics that I wanted to hit on a little bit, I don't want to dwell too much in the past, but we have to make some decisions in terms of planting and replanting, at least in my geography. Whether or not it's pertinent to you guys, I do want to cover it just briefly, quickly. And one thing, we're still assessing some stands. I've assessed quite a few this week. We're going to continue to do that. A lot of that is that suspect late April planted corn got pounded by heavy rain and struggling to come through in places. Last time we talked about replant assessment, I probably made a big snafu just throwing out a general number. But I would say one thing you got to think about is obviously your own personality on your farm. How perfect do you want it? You also really got to take uniformity into play. How uniform is that stand? Is it really uneven? I've seen some really uneven stands from that planting date. And then think a little bit about conditions. We've got some of these flat fields that it just absolutely pounded and it's turned into concrete, and take that with a really uneven stand and a light amount of plants. And that's not a good recipe for someone that's really trying to drive yields. So I'll just say, I mean, if you look at the average data in Missouri would say you get into that mid to lower planted 20,000 stand that's came up from that April stand that's planted in April. You compare that to a full stand that's planted today, and the average numbers would say that those are relatively equal. Now, we all know, though, that Mother Nature can drive a lot of things. We know that a perfect stand planted mid May, at least in my geography, can yield excellent if we have the right moisture along the way. And we know that that lighter stand in April could struggle depending on how the weather goes, or it might be the best one depending on how rainfall comes later. So I guess I just wanted to mention that a little bit. I wasn't real, didn't describe it well last time. And then I guess just quickly, guys, and you guys jump in here. I'll go through these. You add in points as you want to. But if we have to kill a failed stand of corn, there's there's a few different things that you can do. One, probably the most popular one is tillage, and I would say on that, tillage is totally fine as long as you're ripping out the old stand. I mean, going across there with the vertical tillage tool is probably not going to do it. You've got to take it out. It's probably going to take a field cultivator, but as long as you totally rip that stand out, that can work. Um, and just make sure that that stand is far enough along that you can rip it out. The next one, probably another more popular one, is coming in there with clethodim, i.e. generic select. If you're running a 2 EC or a 2 pound product, the rate's 3 ounces. You have to wait a minimum of 6 days to plant, though, if you do utilize that. So there's a 6-day plant back before you can go back in with corn. The label says not to use crop oil, not to use MSO, but it does state to utilize AMS at 2.5 to 4 pounds. So that's another option. Just remember, you're going to have to wait to plant. One of the ways you can replant that stand right away without a wait time is running something like Gramoxone and Metribuzin together. There's no wait time on that. The minimum you probably rates wise you want to run probably 40 ounces of Gramoxone from a lot of data plus the 4 ounces of Metribuzin. Now, lots of people talk about that Gramoxone, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's true, it doesn't work. If you try to go out there by itself, that will not work. That'll fry the top of the corn. It'll regrow. You have to utilize that photosystem 2 inhibitor or that Metribuzin, etc., with the Gramoxone to totally take that out. So just keep that in mind. That option may become harder and harder in future years just with Syngenta dropping out of that Gramoxone production line. The last option, some Bayer hybrids do not have Liberty tolerance, so you can use Liberty on those. You just got to be sure you know which ones. And there's obviously no wait time to plant, but you got to be sure you utilize an AMS and at least 32 ounces or more of Liberty. It's not, you look at a lot of data, it's not always as consistent as the other options we mentioned, but for some of those Bayer hybrids, it is a potential option. With that said, do you guys want to add anything to that?
So, yeah, I've been on a couple calls this week on going there just because, should I replant or assess in the stand and things like that. And so I can't add much more than as far as your terminating recommendations are spot on. But I guess a lot of things to consider. You know, I think you mentioned it, but inconsistency within the row to me is a lot bigger deal than inconsistency within the field. So if I got a big chunk of the field that's emerging here and then the other one's here, I mean, picking and choosing which area of the field to replant. But if we're down the row, every single row, I got every 5 or 6 plants that are behind. That to me is a little bit more alarming too. And so, can we isolate some areas of the field and not necessarily have to take out the whole field? Has been one thing that I've seen this week. But also consider your yield goal and how much you already have invested into that field too. I know that's not a black and white answer, but whenever I'm going to replant, I'm going to consider, okay, if I come back in here, I take the time, I take the fuel cost, the money to rip it up, or the money for the Gramoxone Metribuzin mix to spray there. how much fertilizer I've already put down, what's my yield goal, and what's at risk here too. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of things to consider before you just go in there and tear something back up, because you could potentially do more harm than good.
Yeah, those are good points, Derek, and that's a really good point too, and that's one to make. Is yeah, I usually assess how does that stand look uniformity wise, and I always tell guys if you have a plant that's at V2 and you have one that's just spiking through next to it, there's a huge yield penalty. But if you have a acre area of the field that's all spiking out, and then an acre area of the field where it's all V2, then that's not as, like you said, that's not as detrimental as when you have plants in the row that are uneven.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good points there. I guess one other
Comment,
thing. Go ahead,
comment
Ron.
I'll make, if you are going to mechanically or tear it up, to your earlier point, Nick, make darn sure you're tearing them up and you're not transplanting them. So it's easy to say I'll just run across there and tear it up, but you got to make sure you get them tore up, or you're going to have a bigger mess than if you just left it alone.
Yeah, spot on, Rodney. You can end up with a total mess if you don't actually take it out. You could end up with 50,000 plants per acre. Good points, guys. Derek, I might flip it back to you. We were talking before it started about planting depth and just any impacts you want to bring up about that.
Yeah. So again, looking at some fields this week where there was some concern. One thing I was noticing was, you know, some shallow planting, which is not good. But again, at this point, I'm just concerned if it's going to be a little on the shallow side. Say we got corn 1.5 inches where we want it to be 2 inches. How consistent is that depth? Even if we're a little bit shallow, it kind of goes with what we're just talking about in terms of uneven emergence. But if we're a little on the shallow side, I'm less concerned about that as long as it's all on the shallow side, if you would. But whenever we have it all across the board, where we got stuff ranging from 1 inch to 2 inches, that's where we're going to really see the big problem. And so, as a general rule of thumb, I like corn around 2 inches, and I don't mind beans being at 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches. But consistency, especially with corn, is the key on the planting depth part. I don't know if that's what you were talking about there, Nick, but yeah, I'm seeing some shallow planting depth, but again, it's not the shallowness necessarily that's worrying me as much as the inconsistency in the depth. That's what's going to hurt you.
Yeah, and the thing I'll
Well,
mention too on that planting depth piece of it is just the fact that we generally say 2 inches, and that's because if you plant 2 inches or you plant greater than 2 inches, you're gonna get more of that root system below ground, which means more nutrient uptake, which means more drought tolerance, which means more standability. So yeah, you hear a lot of people talk about, well, shallowed it up, just trying to get a stand. Well, one thing about it is you may think you're gonna get the stand now, but you could really be hurting yourself down the road. And the other
Well,
thing is, oh, go ahead.
and
I'm sorry.
we always talk about that with corn, but with beans too. 70% of that root system is going to be in the top 2 inches. And so if we don't get those planted down deep enough, whenever it's inevitable, we're going to dry out at some point, right? And they don't have a long, deep root system like corn does. And so if most of our root systems up top, if we don't get those planted down deep enough, we're going to run into issues with beans as well.
Rodney, did you want to add something?
yeah. So what we got to remember is, so your planting depth, what you have is what you have now, unless you're willing to tear it up, redo it. So we have to manage to how it was planted. And to Derek's point, was it even or wasn't? But you still got to live with what you've done, so to speak, and then manage it accordingly of how you help that crop continue on in the situation it's in. So that's the assessment of, yeah, planting depth very critical, but you have what you have because that's what you did.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point.
those are good points. I'd say just for me generally, I'd just tell folks almost anymore. Just telling somebody this yesterday, I almost tell folks 2.25 because then that field's going to range. We generally have a lot of variability. It's going to range from 2 inches to 2.5, when I'm totally comfortable in that range. Versus if I tell somebody 2 inches and it's really variable, then it might be 1.75 inches and to 2.25. So I'd rather just be at that as consistent as I can to that 2 inches or greater. Yeah, and a lot of people think about, getting that stand up quicker if I shallow it, but the temperature is more buffered at that 2-inch depth, so that's generally not the case, and you're just giving up so much later in the season. Yeah, great points, guys. The soybean thing, we tend to, especially on our clay paint soils, tend to deal with a lot of variability. I don't get quite as stickler on that. Now, I don't like to shallow it up, and some of those guys will do, and or have done in the past. Maybe shallow things up to hope for a rain later. Like nothing like that. I want to plant into moisture, but I'm not as much of a stickler on a set per se depth. But yeah, I think depending on the soil type you're on, you got a point there, Derek. Sometimes we can go deeper and get things off to a better start. But with that said,
it goes back to, like you said, chasing moisture and planting into consistent moisture is key in both of them. So, I mean, you're probably splitting hairs if you go 1.5 inches versus 1.75 inches, those types of things, as long as we're in consistent moisture. But a lot of my territory, we deal with so much geography, and we got terraces and hill ground and bottom ground, and that perfect depth is where that moisture's at, because those seeds are going to imbibe that water within 24 hours. So that'll, as long as it's consistent.
yeah, good points. Moving over weed control, that's still feel like a broken record a little bit, like we've discussed that over and over, but I think it's still a very important topic. And so starting out, I think Derek may be talking about what we were discussing earlier about spraying when we need to versus when we want to, but especially in a year like this where things are drug out.
Yeah, that's been the other thing I've been seeing all week is, we got, like I said, crop or corns at V4 at most, and most of it's in around that V1, and soybeans around right around the same stage. And so we're so far from canopy, but we had certain areas had one of the wettest Aprils on record. And so if you're pre and burn down and residual went down in late March, early April, some of that's starting to break. And so I'm getting the question of, hey, I got weeds here, but I wasn't planning on spraying until later this month or first part of June. And I would encourage everybody, we can still possibly do a 2-pass system here, but we got to spray when the weeds are there, not necessarily when we want to. But for those fields that are breaking early and we're going in earlier than we thought and we're so far from canopy, consider adjusting that residual rate. And if we got winter annuals that we maybe missed on the burn down, we need to start optimizing those tank mixes, and maybe we up that adjuvant load, make a little quote unquote hotter, if you would, making sure we have our AMS in there. But even adjusting residual rates if we come back a little bit quicker than we were maybe planning on. But yeah, again, we can't calendar date our spray applications anymore. And I know some people are probably going to be coming even in with their post apps next week, which was earlier than we intended. But if we wait, we're just going to create a bigger issue for ourselves, because that crop canopy is going to start getting bigger, going to be starting to get harder to hit weeds. I've always, about V2 and beans is when weed competition is going to start taking yield. V4, V3, V4 and corn is when, if weeds are out there, it's going to start taking yield. And so, unfortunate if you have to come back with your post pass earlier than you thought, but we got to spray when we need to, not when we want to sometimes.
Yeah, Rodney, you want to add any points on that weed control topic?
No, and Derek's spot on, but just make sure you spray when you need to. It's exactly what he was saying, not because you're looking at, oh, that's not normal. This year for us is not normal. So you need to spray. You do not want weed competition, and you do not want weeds getting ahead of you. So earlier the better on that, and up residuals right now, because you need to buy some time. And as temperatures rise and we have moisture, things are going to grow faster.
Yeah, you guys are spot on. I mean, an example in our geography, some folks burnt down the end of March and planned on planting, sometime in mid-April, and that didn't happen. Some of those folks still haven't got it planted yet. And that could turn into a real mess real quick. It has turned into a real mess real quick. It's just a lot of pressure to put on a post-emergence herbicide. So to your guys' point, you got to shift things up earlier. May require an extra pass, may require increasing rates, but you're going to have to do something. And I'll just
Nick, I also want to add to that, and sorry to interrupt there, but before we switch topics, also, if we're going to be replanting or you still have to plant, remember to separate that herbicide application from your planting date by probably 5 to 7 days. I had some cases this week where they might want to go in and spray right now, but they still need to go back in and replant or just plant. And if we spray and then we damage that weed, we're probably not going to get much activity. So if you're going to replant or you still just need to plant and you're going to spray, make sure we're separating those applications or that mechanical damage a little bit.
Yeah, just to add to that topic a little bit on weed control, just remembering the importance of residuals and overlapping those residuals is really important. Those residuals help reduce that pressure on post-emergence herbicides. And I just think about water hemp. If you have a carpet of water hemp, let's say there's a million or more per acre, you get 90% control. That's actually pretty good, but there's still going to be a lot of water hemp out there. 10% of a million is a big number. Versus if we have a good residual down, we only have, say, 100 water hemp plants per acre. 90% control looks way better. So I get my point is just don't leave a gap in those residuals. So to your point, spraying when you need to versus when you want to may look cleaner than you think out there, but you need to lay another residual down to keep that water hemp from coming up. The other point I just make too is we're talking about all this and trying to control, especially when we're going after big weeds now, as a lot of us are. When we're trying to do that, be sure you assess control. Go out there a couple weeks after, see how things look, because we don't have a lot of extra time right now for a rescue application. So we can't let things go by the wayside, forget about them. We got to be on top of it. And if it didn't work, we got to go back and try to fix it as quick as we can. You're bringing up, reducing yield, Derek, and yeah, there's some data that out there that has shown that corn will start to reduce its yield potential before it even emerges if it senses a lot of weed competition above it. So weed control is especially important in corn, but important in soybeans too. And to your point, beans start determine the number of branches that they're going to make at a very, very early stage. So we don't want a dense mat of weeds up above them for them to start reducing that. With that said, guys, I mean, one other just quick point is if we have some high loads of herbicide or going at things, trying to take out some big weeds, just one thing to remember is it might help to add something for that crop to metabolize that herbicide. So there's a lot of different options out there, but that might be something you want to look at. All right, we probably beat that topic enough. I don't know if we want to switch into real quick here before we finish, but just corn growth stages. Where are you guys at in terms of growth stages with the current crop? I just want to talk about that and what that crop is currently going through. Rodney, I know you said you were further behind, but where would your earliest crop be at right now?
V2 to V3 would be our earliest on corn. And so some of that's starting to get the uglies, I call it, because we're running out of carbohydrates in the seed. And, we'll be another week or so, and then we'll be switching to the seminal roots. And so when you do that, your things are it gets ugly until it gets some roots taking up nutrients out of the soil. So, and early beans, we're still in the cotyledon stage. But some of the early ones will be, getting up there. But just remember that's why you may drive by and say, man, that corn's ugly. Well, it's starting to switch off living off the seed onto its own roots, and sometimes there's a little lag there.
Yeah, Derek, what about you?
Yeah, so like I said, the furthest along corn I've seen so far in my territory is V4. I'm not saying there isn't some more there a little bit further, but the other big thing is when we hit V5, now that growing point's above the ground. So consider that as well. But we're pretty quick here in the next week or so. Now that we're going to be collecting heat units, we kind of cooled down and over this last couple of weeks. And so stuff's not growing as fast, but as we warm up here, the growing point's going to be above the ground. And then we're going to start determining that kernel number, at least around the rows around the ear here pretty quick. And so that rapid uptake of nutrients won't be too far away. It'll be coming pretty quick. And as we move on to post apps, we need to start thinking about providing the needed nutrition here over the next couple of weeks for the earliest planted corn. But again, on the bean side of things, it's just eliminating that weak competition right now. Given the stages that we're at, we don't have much past V1 there. So
Yeah, good points, guys. Not a lot to add. I mentioned our earliest would be pushing V6. Yeah, to your point, the growing point of cubs above ground, plants determine rows around on that kernel. At Rodney's point, it's setting down its nodal root system, so it can go through kind of an ugly duckling stage until those roots set and start. It really starts to take off. The V2, V3 stuff, like Rodney said, is switching off the kernel reserves. It's switching onto its own nodal roots, and yeah, soybeans, at V2, they're starting to determine some things like branching, etc. But I don't have many of those. A lot of ours are at a lesser stage than that. So some important stuff going on. Derek brought up rapid uptake of nutrients. I guess that's the last thing I want to leave everyone with. But just start thinking about or talking about top dress, side dress nitrogen applications. You start hitting V8, that corn plant is starting max uptake or peak uptake of nitrogen. And so it's important to have some nitrogen there, obviously, to hit that. There have been some folks in the past that were thinking more about late season nitrogen and not as much about feeding that crop on the curve. There's different ways, different philosophies to go about that. But I'll just say a lot of the data has shown that a V6 side dress application yields the same as waiting until later to do it. So although we can rescue corn pretty late, and a lot of data shows that, even after tassel at blister stage, we can still rescue a corn crop. But if you want to be more proactive, a lot of the data says you get it on a V6. That's just as good as waiting till later. I guess a couple other points, and then you guys can jump in here too. But obviously, sulfur, I think a lot of people have heard that by now, but just a good partner with nitrogen. That plant needs that nitrogen and sulfur for building protein. So it's an important nutrient to add. I think a lot of folks have jumped on board with that. When it comes to rates, I've had a fair amount of people that have kind of gone to this 100 pounds of AMS type rate, which would be 24 pounds or so of sulfur. I think that's a good rate. I know it's gotten a little more expensive lately, so some folks are being a little tighter with the purse strings with that, and I can understand. I'll just say that some sulfur is better than none. So whatever the pocketbook will allow, but a lot of times that 20 to 24 pounds is a good rate to be at for total, with some high yield guys going much higher than that too. But I guess it kind of gives you a target a little bit. And then, yeah, I'll just say some is better than none. So whatever you can afford to do. And then boron from a micronutrient standpoint, that's one thing that I've gone to where I like to include that in a top dress pass. Boron's extremely mobile in the soil, and we've had some pretty good luck. I mean, I still like foliar boron to help supplement, but to get a big jolt in that plant, that has worked really well the last couple of years. So just some things to think about. And I'd also just add, be sure you're able to, you're thinking about if you need to adjust your nitrogen program or if you need to have a rescue plan in place just in case something happens. I think about in my geography where we've had people that fall applied anhydrous still haven't planted their corn yet. It's a big gap they didn't expect to have. And if we have a lot more rain here in May, June, even early July, we could lose a lot of that nitrogen, especially where we've kind of pushed uptake further back. We applied in the fall, but our uptake just keeps going further and further back into the season. It'd be a good time to reassess things if you weren't planning on a side dress application on those acres. We have a lot of rain, they're definitely going to need one. With that said, do you guys want to add something on that top dress or side dress nitrogen?
I just say on my end, we're a ways from that, but good points. Now's the time, though, we need to be thinking of that, because once our temps are coming up, got plenty of moisture, this crop is really going to take off. Once it sticks its head above ground and it gets sunlight, things start changing really fast. So yeah, we're focusing on weed control and getting that done, but we also need to have a plan of attack for our top dress. And what we said earlier in our conversation about, the planting depth, and we have what we have. Well, now is the time we can help that crop. If there's potentially something that we need to address, now's when we can do it on the top dress. So we need to start planning now, so we're ready to roll when it is when the crop and in my geography, when it gets ready, we're ready to roll.
Yeah, I would just echo exactly what you guys said. I'm just saying it a different way, but basically, we talked about we're still at the spot in the year where we can stay ahead of weeds, but we can also stay ahead of that nutrition program as well. And so just be thinking ahead. I know everybody's running wild trying to get all the crops planted, and got a lot going on right now, but be thinking of that next step, because it will happen quick. But good news is we're still at a stage and a time of the year where we can stay ahead of weeds, we can stay ahead of the nutrition, and still put some good plans in place. So
all good points, guys. Well, with that, appreciate everyone listening. Appreciate everybody joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.